I am Buff, I am the stuff, and the girls just can't get enough. This shout out goes to the wrestling bios on the YouTube channel. Listen up, you guys, for the lowdown on all of your favorite wrestling superstars. Tune in to the wrestling bios and learn all the shit about guys like me, where we grew up, where we live, what our hobbies are, what we're fucking doing right now, what we're fucking doing in an hour. Check this out, it's unbelievable. Take it from me. This is the place to be. Wrestling bios. Check it out. Buff Daddy's out.
Marcus Bagwell is best known for his time in Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling during the 90s. He was fortunate enough to be under contract during a time period when WCW Monday Night Raw was destroying WWF Raw in the Monday Night Ratings War, leading to Bagwell getting some huge exposure that just wasn't available before the late 90s boom period. The stars kind of aligned for Buff Bagwell, as not only was he in the hottest wrestling company in the world at the right time, but he was also part of a faction that was making headlines, the New World Order. The word underrated means that the majority rates something or someone lower than what it should be. Some wrestlers get labelled as underrated, and due to this, over time, the term doesn't fit the superstar anymore. If a majority feels that you're underrated, then are you truly still not rated as highly as you should be? In regards to Buff Bagwell, I don't really see a majority saying that the guy was underrated, but I definitely feel that he was. He won't rank up there in most people's top 10 lists, and he may not have had an elusive Dave Meltzer 5-star classic, but Marcus Bagwell could hold his own in the ring, and it seems no one really mentions this. Along with his in-ring ability, he carved his own character, an over-the-top, cocky and self-centered heel that felt his physique was what made him an ultra-star. Tales of Buff Bagwell's backstage antics have overshadowed his time in the ring, and I feel this really is a shame. Buff brought something different to the New World Order, a faction that relied heavily on past successes in other companies, whereas Marcus was using his time in the NWO to try and break out, seeing as he really didn't have huge success before joining the heel supergroup. I agree that Buff was never going to win world titles across the world, but I also feel that the guy doesn't get enough credit for his time in WCW. And yes, the stories of his conduct towards his peers and even management is well documented. His attitude was sometimes his worst enemy, but it's curious how some superstars get a bye ball in this area, while others remain tarnished for life. So in today's video, let's take a look at Buff Bagwell's time in wrestling. Marcus Alexander Bagwell was born on January 10th, 1970 in Marietta, Georgia. He was a standout baseball player in high school, however he decided to pursue amateur boxing after graduating. Missy Hyatt had moved into the same complex that Marcus Bagwell was living at. Missy thought that Marcus had a great look, thinking the guy would make for a perfect wrestler and selling Marcus on the fact that wrestlers can earn big money. By 1990, Marcus was working for North Georgia Wrestling as Fabulous Fabian. A year later, he debuted in the GWF as the Handsome Stranger, a gimmick that saw Marcus wearing a mask and handing out roses to female fans. Magnum TA contacted Marcus offering him a WCW tryout. Buff was paid $500 a week to attend training and act as a sort of stand-in wrestler. When Barry Windham hurt his knee, Marcus was put on the road and thrown into the ring, giving Marcus a chance here to show what he could do. Dusty Rhodes decided to sign Marcus to a proper full-time contract afterwards, and Marcus was able to debut in time for Starrcade 91, teaming up with Jimmy Garvin here to defeat Michael Hayes and Tracy Smothers in a lethal lottery tag match. He was also part of the Battle Bowl final that evening. After Starrcade, Bagwell's next match was against none other than Steve Austin for the television title. The match went to a draw, meaning Steve retained his belt, but unfortunately I have not been able to find any footage of this particular match. Other Austin vs Bagwell matches do exist online, but not this particular match from 1992. I think it would be cool to see, and if anyone out there knows where I can find it, let me know in the comments. Marcus here, in his early days, was portraying a white meat babyface to a rather extreme extent. Buff said that he struggled being so young in a locker room filled with older guys, and he said that it was Sting who took him under his wing to look after him. After feuding with Terry Taylor and emerging victorious at Super Brawl 2, Bagwell formed a team with Tom Zenk, who mainly feuded with Terry Taylor and Greg Valentine. Of note also, Bagwell and Zenk had a match at Clash of the Champions 19 against Rick Rude and Steve Austin, however they lost this match. Zenk and Bagwell continued to team up in the months that followed, failing to win any championships as they were used to put bigger and more established teams over. In 1993, however, Bagwell began teaming with Cold Scorpio, a team that Bagwell says really helped him stand out in World Championship Wrestling. The combination of Cold Scorpio and Marcus Bagwell was indeed a success. The team was given some big wins on pay-per-view, leading to an eventual tag team title shot against the Nasty Boys. Marcus and Scorpio were successful in defeating Sags and Knobs, picking up the titles here in an okay bout, nothing to write home about. This would be the first of 5 tag title reigns for Marcus Bagwell. Scorpio and Bagwell dropped the belts back to the Nasty Boys at Halloween Havoc 1993. In early 1994, Scorpio was let go from WCW and thus Bagwell was left without a tag partner. He formed a brand new tag team with the Patriot Dale Wilkes known as Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes were quickly put in contention for the WCW tag titles after losing to Pretty Wonderful, a tag team consisting of Paul Roma and Paul Orndorff at Fall Brawl 94. Stars and Stripes were able to pick up the tag titles in a rematch held in September. Stars and Stripes dropped the belts to Pretty Wonderful at Halloween Havoc but won the titles back at Clash of the Champions 29, making Marcus Bagwell a 3-time tag champion in pretty quick time. When the Patriot left WCW, Marcus was again left without a partner. He got featured in tag matches where he would team up with the likes of Johnny B. Bad and Alex Wright, but nothing really came of these partnerships. It seemed like Bagwell was being left to flounder in WCW's lower mid-card, but in September of 95, Marcus would team up with Scotty Riggs to form the American Males, another team that won the tag titles. It wouldn't be the team's tag title reign that the world would remember them for, nor was it their underrated matches with Harlem Heat. No, it was their entrance theme. For those who have never heard the American Males theme song, take a break right now from this video and go have a listen. After winning and dropping the tag titles to Harlem Heat in late 95, the American Males pretty much became jobbers in WCW. They lost a ton of matches throughout 1996, and with the rise of the NWO in summer that year, it's hard to imagine Marcus Bagwell having any kind of notable role within World Championship Wrestling going forward. Marcus did have a match at the Great American Bash 1996, losing to Diamond Dallas Page in a decent 10-minute showdown, and he also appeared in the 1996 World War III match as just another body to get thrown over the top rope. Something had to change here. The writing was on the wall for Marcus. Fast forward to November 25th, 1996. At the beginning of the WCW Nitro broadcast that evening, Eric Bischoff came to the ring with the New World Order. Eric said that it was time for WCW wrestlers to decide what side they're on during his infamous "You're either with us or against us" speech. The American Males made their way to the ring, and instantly, Marcus Bagwell began high-fiving NWO members. Scotty Riggs got dropped in the ring by Bagwell, and thus, the NWO had its latest member. Marcus said, "Believe it or not, me and Eric Bischoff were not that tight. As a matter of fact, Eric didn't like me at all. I worked for him and he was my boss, but I could tell just by talking to him that he didn't like me. So it was Kevin Nash that came to me, and since me and Kev go way back to our days in Atlanta and clubbing when he was a bouncer, he said they wanted to bring me into the NWO. He said Bischoff wasn't big on me, but he told Eric that I had charisma and will fit right into this thing. On the flight home we started to think of a name, and all of a sudden it was referee Nick Patrick from the back corner of first class in the darkest area who said, "What about Buff?" Everyone just stopped and not another name was assumed, and everyone said, "That's it, Buff Bagwell is perfect." Now, the assumption we all have here is Bagwell joined the New World Order due to the fame and glory that came along with it. Why else would anyone want to join? Being a member of the NWO meant more bookings, more TV time, more matches, right? Well, you know how many matches Marcus Bagwell had on Nitro in 1996 after joining the NWO? Marcus Bagwell had 0 matches on Nitro. As a matter of fact, Marcus Bagwell didn't get a single match on Nitro until June of 1997. I know this sounds hard to believe, but look it up yourself. Buff Bagwell was always there during the standard NWO beatdowns and in-ring group promos, but the guy never worked on Monday nights. He did have a few pay-per-view matches, including a DQ loss to Diamond Dallas Page at Super Brawl 7 and a win over Scotty Riggs in March at Uncensored, but it's really weird that Buff Bagwell was not used that much on Monday nights. It just seemed to me that the guy was always having matches on Mondays, but in reality, he wasn't. Marcus did get a chance to work in New Japan thanks to the WCW and New Japan working relationship. It was in Japan that Buff Bagwell began teaming with Scott Norton, another member of the NWO who would travel back and forth to New Japan as a member of NWO Japan. Scott Norton was a big deal in New Japan, going on to win the IWGP Heavyweight title in September of 1998, but unfortunately, back in WCW, this title win didn't alter Scott's standing within the NWO. Anyway, at New Japan Fighting Spirit 1997, Bagwell and Norton began teaming together, and eventually the duo would be known as Vicious and Delicious. The team played off each other quite well, with Scott Norton being the big no-nonsense tough guy and Buff Bagwell being the egotistical mouthpiece. Vicious and Delicious mainly feuded with the Steiner brothers, however the team never did pick up tag team gold. However, I must say, I did find the tag team quite entertaining for sure. Getting into the later half of 1997, and we can see Buff Bagwell now getting booked into more matches on weekly Nitro shows with more consistency. Vicious and Delicious were getting matches against the Steiners, the Guerreros, even the Four Horsemen, so Buff was now getting a good chance to show the world what he was made of. A real career highlight came at Starrcade 97 when Buff Bagwell was able to defeat Lex Luger in a match that went nearly 17 minutes long. The only problem here was that Buff and Luger already had quite a few matches on TV in the run-up to Starrcade. On the April 22nd, 1998 edition of WCW Thunder, Vicious and Delicious worked against Rick Steiner and Lex Luger. In the closing moments of the match, Rick Steiner hit Bagwell with his top rope diving bulldog, but the move was badly botched. Bagwell was diagnosed with several damaged vertebrae and he developed spinal shock, leading to him legitimately requiring a wheelchair and a neck brace. The moment is scary for sure. All the footage that aired that evening is available on the WWE network, and you can see the sheer look of panic as Bagwell is on the mat while his body refuses to move. When Bagwell returned to TV months later, he was still in the wheelchair, and Hulk Hogan and the NWO called him weak as the Hulkster pushed Buff off his wheelchair and onto the floor. On the July 20th episode of Nitro, live from Bagwell's home state of Georgia, Bagwell seemed to present a new outlook on life, asking Rick Steiner out so Buff could make peace with the man who left him in a wheelchair. Rick came out, the two men hugged, but suddenly Scott Steiner appeared and hit Rick with a chair. Of course, moments later, Buff also hit Rick with a chair, taking his neck brace off to reveal it was all a giant swerve. Buff was still a bad guy, reminding us all that NWO was for life and one of the more memorable Nitro moments that involved the lower level NWO members. A great segment here. Bagwell would continue working in the mid-card, eventually becoming part of the NWO Wolfpack in early '99, but there is nothing really of note here that occurred for Buff Bagwell. It seemed his place in wrestling was solidified in the mid-card. However, when new management joined the company in the form of Vince Russo, it seemed Buff was in line for a push. After spending the summer of '99 feuding with on-screen WCW President Ric Flair and Vice President Roddy Piper, and working against wrestlers who were much older than what he was, Buff Bagwell joined the New Blood and teamed with Shane Douglas, leading to Bagwell's fifth and final WCW tag title reign. Douglas and Bagwell defeated Ric Flair and Lex Luger for the gold. It wasn't long after this, though, that Bagwell got suspended for 30 days due to a legitimate outburst at a WCW crew member. When Bagwell came back to work in WCW, that Vince Russo push became downright ridiculous. Bagwell feuded with Shane Douglas, leading to a loss at Bash at the Beach 2000. From here, Buff would feud with Chris Kanyon, and this is the very feud that featured Judy Bagwell, Buff's mother, being used in matches. Judy was put on a forklift and Marcus had to defeat Kanyon in order to save his mom. It was atrocious. I usually try to find the good in things like this, and I hate being negative, but still to this day I struggle to see any kind of upside that any of this would have. It was a shambles, and stuff like this really hurt the company and everyone involved in the angle. Bagwell was then put into a feud with David Flair, leading to a First Blood match at Halloween Havoc. The reason being here that David Flair's storyline girlfriend, Miss Hancock, or Stacy Keibler, had mysteriously become pregnant, and David suspected that Buff was the father. In order to get a blood sample to prove his suspicions, a First Blood match was ordered. It was all for nothing too. While Bagwell did get the win, Lex Luger attacked him after the match, got the blood sample, and yep, you guessed it, Buff wasn't the dad. As a matter of fact, the whole pregnancy was a fabrication. It was all one big throwaway angle that, once again, done nothing for anyone involved. During the last months of WCW, Buff Bagwell teamed with his old nemesis Lex Luger to form the Totally Buff tag team. The highlight here being the team's win over Goldberg at the WCW Sin pay-per-view. So moving forward, WCW was bought by the WWF and Buff Bagwell's contract was acquired by Vince McMahon. Keep in mind, Buff Bagwell had a guaranteed AOL Time Warner contract, but he accepted the buyout from Vince so he could begin a new chapter in the World Wrestling Federation. Buff made his WWF TV debut on the July 2nd, 2001 episode of Raw, facing Booker T for the WCW title in a match billed as the very first WCW match to occur on Raw. Now, this match is something that intrigues me too. I'll keep this brief, but this was nowhere near as bad as what people make out, in my opinion anyway. Even the WWE, to this day, calls this match awful, but watch it back with the volume down. It wasn't that bad. The crowd hated it and began booing almost instantly, but this was just a typical WWF crowd booing WCW stars. It's not a 5-star classic, but calling this one of the worst matches in wrestling history is absolutely ridiculous. It wasn't even the worst match on this night. With Rhino versus Test, and Matt Hardy and Lita versus Trish Stratus in the Big Show, giving Buff and Booker T a run for their money. Still, the WWF were listening to the crowd here, and the crowd really did turn on Booker and Buff. The match ended with Kurt Angle and Steve Austin beating up Booker T and throwing him out of the arena. Afterwards, Austin and Angle turned on Buff, who had helped during the Booker T beatdown. The next week, Buff showed up for TV and was fired on the spot. There's been much discussion regarding Buff's firing here, and the man himself has done plenty of shoot interviews where you can learn more. The story we've been given in a nutshell was that Buff Bagwell and Shane Helms got into a scuffle backstage. Shane Helms threw a bottle of water at Buff, leaving Buff with a busted open head. This fight apparently got Shane Helms some bonus points with the WWE locker room, as Buff wasn't very well liked to begin with. There's also a story about Bradshaw and Farouk powerbombing Buff Bagwell, which led to an injury. The story goes that Buff's mother phoned WWF offices to complain about the powerbomb, saying Buff needed time to heal, and also Buff's mother complained about Bagwell's travel arrangements. Buff, to this day, denies all of this, and he says that the stories were made up by Jim Ross in order to bury him. Buff says that JR ruined his career. He places the blame totally on Jim. I'm not here to sway opinions, you can make up your own mind here, but it's all very messy, with both sides being adamant regarding their truth in the story. But either way, Buff was gone from the WWF before he even got started. Another quick note, I've never saw this power bomb that was supposedly delivered from the APA. If anyone has any footage of that, do let me know, but it seems to be one of these things that nobody has actually saw. Buff made a couple of appearances for TNA in the years that followed, but nothing really came of it. He also worked for Jimmy Hart's XWF and the World Wrestling All-Stars. 2012 though would be a trying year for Marcus Bagwell. In 2012, Buff Bagwell was involved in a serious car accident which was brought on due to a seizure behind the wheel. He was put into intensive care after suffering broken bones in his neck, face and jaw. It was a real bad accident which required Marcus to be hooked up to feeding and breathing tubes, and his surgery had to be delayed extensively due to the swelling on his face and neck. In the end, Marcus recovered with 4 plates surgically inserted into his face and having his jaw wired shut. It took some time, but as you can see at the top of this video, Buff Bagwell is looking extremely well these days. To this day, Buff still works independent shows. At the time of this video upload, his last match was in August of 2019.